this is the Water Dancer novel written by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which was published in September 24th on 2019. He is an American journalist and writer. He mainly discusses cultural, political, and social views such as Black Lives Matter movement, and he's also written amazing novels such as Between the World and Me and The Beautiful Struggle, which you should read after this book, of course. This title carries such significance and value to the book because it's the way his mother Rose and Aunt Emma used to dance, which the dance was simultaneously having fun while doing work, as the objective was to carry a water jar over your head and try to eloquently not spill anything. This book was applauded around the nation by receiving Oprah Winfrey's nomination to be in her book club, and Random House imprint has been named fantastic. The Guardian has called this book a slave's memory, and this book has won the Audie Award for Literary Fiction Classics. It's definitely one that you should take your time to read. Its significance, the protagonist always being Hiram Walker. This is a quick synopsis of the story, which is told in first person by Hiram Walker, and it starts off when he's driving in the carriage off the road, sending himself and his half-brother / master Maynard off the water. We learn that Hiram is related to Maynard because that is his half-brother. His mom was a slave who he lost in the slave trade, and his father was his master. Growing up, he was smart. He took the same tutoring as his brother, and he was kind of immersed a little bit into what life his brother had. However, he was always his brother's servant. And he excelled more than his brother, which makes it a complicated story for him to realize that at the end he did not get to actually be accepted by the family into the manor. So he goes on this journey of meeting people such as Harriet Tubman and having discussions with her, as she plays a significant role in obviously this story, which is told by a slave's perspective of him being able to conduct and use his powers, which are to align people into a certain memory and take them there. And he's able to do this and talks to Harriet about how to manifest and how to create those and use those powers for good in the end. The overall mood and feeling of this novel comes within these themes of memory and forgetting, of broken families being torn apart by racism and bigotry. This has gone back to when slaves were torn away from their home and put on boats, where half of them survived to be sold on the slave trade and dispersed between the South. Knowledge and power dynamics, and how Hiram discusses with Harriet his abilities to kind of conduct memory, and the freedom water movement. Obviously, this book has a lot to do with slaves' journey for freedom, decent humanity versus inhumane. We know that this book is inhumane in the way that slavery shouldn't have ever happened, and we can see from the slave's perspective how humane these people are and how much they. Moving on to genre, I wanted to start here and talk about the many genres that this book takes on: science fiction and historical, as well as some may argue fantasy. Starting off with science fiction, it definitely takes on this magical realism that helps capture the powers of Hiram when conducting those to his memory, and is discussed with Harriet Tubman and how to use those powers for good, how to manifest them. And obviously, the story aligns with the historical context of slavery and how they tried to gain freedom. And this book explores and is even named, a slave's perspective. And this is why this book matters so much. And does this change the meaning? I think it does. I think this book relates to what's going on with Black Lives Matter, which is so important, and that we should stop and realize that this has been 400 years of oppression and 400 years of systematic racism, that all of a sudden we want that to magically go away. And it's not. It's here, it's real, and this book definitely points out where it started.
Moving on to the dialogues in this novel. The dialogues in this novel often helps to demonstrate the relationships between people, and sometimes carrying important teachings that will be passed down. The first quote is taken from the beginning of the novel, when Hiram's surrogate mother, Thena, warns him of his father, Howell, the master of the Lockless estate. She warns him of his father's true intentions of keeping him close, and that he mustn't forget that she is more of a mother to him than Howell is Hiram's father. Many kids like Hiram, children of their master and an enslaved woman, has false hopes at the chance that they might even get to inherit something. But just as this quote foreshadows, Hiram is never valued as a human being himself. All the acknowledgement and schooling his father gives him is to make Hiram a proper manservant for his half-brother, Maynard. Thena's warnings show that when slavery brutally separates their families, they really have to look out for each other and form new familial bonds in order to support each other and survive. The second quote is a dialogue that summarizes the most important takeaway in the entire novel: the importance of memory to enslaved people. In this conversation between Harriet and Hiram, Harriet explains the power of conduction. In this novel, Hiram possesses the power that can teleport people, a power that is fueled by his most precious and painful memory of his mother. Author Coates emphasizes the importance of memory in this novel by making it the literal power that's able to rescue people from slavery, making memory quite literally, like Harriet said, the bridge between the curse of slavery to the boom of freedom. This dialogue warns people that to forget is to truly slave. To forget is to die. Slavery purposefully destroys people's families, ancestral roots, and memories of their past to crush their spirits. That's why it is so important to remember, so that the old ways can be passed on, so they can always know that they have not always been property, but people with their own cultural roots and a home called Africa. There are many plot devices in this novel that adds to the meaning of the book. Conduction is a form of a plot voucher. It appears quite frequently before its former definition, in the form of a blue light. It saves Hiram from drowning in the River Goose, and is the literal power stemmed from Hiram's memory that can teleport enslaved people straight north. Hiram tries to gain control of this power throughout the entire novel, and eventually realizes that he has to remember the painful memories of his mother in order to possess the power to fight for their freedom. In the novel, conduction is also a sacred practice inherited from Africa. Author Coates is trying to say that in order to achieve lasting freedom for themselves, enslaved people like Hiram has to remember the old ways. They have to remember their own cultures and practices, and that they were never property to begin with. The secret agents are also used to drive the plot, as they're the ones who introduce Hiram to the underground and train him to become an agent. But there's a difference between white abolitionists and Black people who work in the underground. For example, Corinne is a wealthy white abolitionist who turned her estate into an underground station in the South, and also trained Hiram and showed him the way north. However, although white abolitionists in the South are great assets to the underground due to their status, Hiram has met other Black abolitionists in the underground. He is able to realize that to Corinne, slavery is more of a war than finding justice for the enslaved. Because of this, he is able to fight for the justice of the enslaved and treat people with kindness rather than some pawns in the war. Lastly, rescue missions. There are many missions throughout the book that involve Hiram directly and indirectly. Every time a mission succeeds, it helps with Hiram's character development as he recognizes that the underground has given his life meaning. But when a mission to rescue Otha's families has failed, Hiram realizes from Otha's words that they should never be afraid of making new families and connections, even though these connections may be broken at any time. Which is why Hiram decided to stay in the South with Sophia after almost storming off at the sight of her newborn baby in order to form a new family with them and start fresh. The scenes in this book are often filled with emotions, whether it is peaceful or agonizing. Through the eyes of the main character Hiram, these scenes tell the stories of him and the enslaved people like him in the midst of finding freedom. The first quote is taken from the scene where Hiram accidentally drives the carriage into the River Goose with his half-brother in it. Even though both Hiram and Maynard are drowning in the river, to Hiram he sees the image of his mother water dancing and feels completely at peace, and is eventually saved by his power of conduction that teleported him out of the river. But Maynard eventually dies from drowning. This scene is the beginning of Hiram's path to freedom as his master he serves dies. The water is a symbol of freedom and ultimately the path that will carry Hiram to freedom when he masters the power of conduction. Everyone longs for freedom. However, after finding individual freedom, the once enslaved people often experience agonizing guilt and emptiness from leaving their families behind. Hiram learns the traumatizing experiences his friend Otha went through in order to reunite with his family in the second scene. Otha left his wife and children behind and escaped on his own. He became free in the north, but there are so many holes in him and so many pieces cut away. This scene emphasizes the traumatizing and lasting impact of slavery on people. Otha and his brother Raymond could not even recognize each other when they met. This scene demonstrates that family reunions are almost miraculous for most enslaved people, and the process in which people had to go through to find their families are often extremely painful.
So I wanted to talk today about the conclusion, and today we are in a high degree, our political climate is in a high degree of racial tension and systemic racism, with the case of George Floyd, with the case of Breonna Taylor, who has still not been able to find justice. This book is definitely a symbol for what systemic racism in America against Black people has been. And this book is the best audience is for everyone, but definitely for us non-Black citizens, because we need to learn something from this book. This book will teach us the reality from a slave's perspective of what slavery was like 400 years ago, and how that systemic racism hasn't changed with civil rights. It hasn't changed with the ability to vote. Still hasn't changed, because we can see that now more than ever, the Black community is under attack, and we as allies need to support them. This book speaks to tremendous value in the message that it is trying to convey.